This project is an experiment in creative thinking. I set out to make a small table using only standard construction lumber, wood scraps and boards I had laying around the house. I believe that these simple materials, never intended for furniture, can still be a functional and beautiful choice when done tastefully. This is also my first time working with a camera when doing woodworking, so this is yet again another experiment for me. I'm fairly new to woodworking, and my intention of this video is to show all of the fumbling with materials and tools that any newcomer inevitably will experience when starting. Before this project, I cut several 84-inch 2x4s into 28-inch sections and ripped them into two even 1.5 by 1 3/4 inch pieces. This was to think about 2x4s in a new way, a new standard size that is more to furniture scale. Over time, I've used them in several projects around the house, finding that they would work especially well as support pieces without taking up as much space as a 2x4 would. Before starting this recording, I cut several of those pieces into legs and cross pieces to support them. To avoid showing screws on the finished project, I used wood glue to attach the leg pieces together in this build. For the tabletop, I started with a scrap 2x10 I had left over from a bed frame build to use as the center of the table surface and cut it down to the final table length minus 7 inches for the width of two 2x4s on the ends. Digging through my scrap pile, I found a few different boards that were about the right size for the outer edge of the table and experimented with several arrangements to find the right pattern and clean faces. The underside of the table will not be shown, so I used pocket screws to attach the boards together. I used a tabletop pocket hole jig to make the pocket holes. Construction lumber is a little tricky to use here because the edges of the boards are not completely flat and there's some warp to each of the boards. I chose not to rip the chamfered edges from the boards to keep the boards individually identified in the tabletop and to prevent things from rolling off the tabletop if the floor is not completely level or the project is not completely level. Clamps help to keep the pieces together when driving the screws, but can make the warping situation worse if not clamped down to a flat surface as well. With the tabletop screwed together, I centered the legs and attached each set in equal distance from the short edge of the table with two standard construction screws each. With the legs attached, I measured the distance between the set of legs at the middle cross support and cut two of my standard unit 1x2 by 28 inch pieces to fit. I found this worked a lot better than assembling the entire leg assembly before attaching the tabletop, because I didn't have to worry about having things perfectly square before attaching the tabletop. I then broke from my gluing regimen and used screws to attach the long supports between the sets of legs, putting the screw underneath, of course, to prevent it from showing. With all the pieces attached, I took the table outside for sanding, starting with 60 grit to remove the ink stampings and extra glue on the lumber, and then 120 grit to smooth out any major imperfections. After brushing off the surfaces to remove any dust, I applied tung oil to the top surface, legs, and supports of the table to bring out the wood grain and provide some water protection. I used a lint-free cotton cloth to apply the oil generously on the surface, but a little more sparingly on the legs. This is the first time I've used an oil finish on a project, so this was again another experiment. I took extra safety precautions, using gloves to apply the finish, and kept the table outside to prevent any fumes from getting into the house. Disposing the oily rag at the end was the step I was most anxious about, having not done so before, while trying to avoid creating any hazardous waste that had to be stored in water-filled paint cans that I have nowhere to store. When I was finished, I used metal clamps to hang the oily rag inside of a metal trash can and sprayed it with some water to help prevent spontaneous combustion. I moved the trash can throughout the day to prevent it from being in direct sunlight. Once the rag is cured, I plan to dispose of it through the proper channels. The size and height of this table makes it very versatile throughout the house. While I currently plan to use it as a miscellaneous table for the space between my kitchen and dining room, it is also an appropriate height for a bedside table or an end table. Overall, I'm happy with the outcome of this project. I didn't know what I was going to end up with when I started out, but I learned a lot along the way and also a lot about making this video. Thanks for watching. For more info on this project and more, be sure to check out DesignHax.com.